into space. Okay, welcome everyone to this evening's artist conversation with Luke Swinson. I am Dr. Quentin Lewis. I'm the Collections and Programs Manager at the Yager Museum of Art and Culture here at Hartwick College in Oneonta, New York. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that I am currently broadcasting, I guess, from the ancestral hunting grounds of the Oneida Nation, and who, along with the Cayuga, Onondaga, Tuscarora, Seneca, and Mohawk people make up the Six Nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, who are arguably the first participatory democracy in North America. And I want to thank them for their stewardship of this landscape long before I or any of my ancestors got here. Now, this is the second of these artist conversations that we've had. We've been doing this in large part because the museum is closed during the COVID pandemic. And but we've got some really interesting stuff going on in the museum and in programs that we want to do. And one of the really great exhibits that we were able to put together this spring right before COVID arrived was an exhibit called Dadibaajimo, Two Mississauga Artists Share Stories. And earlier this summer, I was privileged to talk to one of the artists in that exhibit, Kathy Jamison, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And now I'm delighted to be joined by the other artist whose work is featured in that exhibit. I do want to mention a couple of things that the museum is going to be doing as like virtual programs that we want to do moving forward here in the COVID pandemic. Next week, next Thursday at 6 o'clock, we're going to be having our annual Halloween storytelling event, The Horror in the Museum, which will feature Hartwick College faculty, staff, and students reading their favorite pieces of short Halloween and horror fiction. We'll also be live streaming that from the museum's Facebook page, so please check back for that. And we hope to do more programming around some of the new exhibits that we're going to be that we're featuring and we're currently putting up. One of them is called With Renewed Courage, Women Artists from the Collection, which features artists from the, well, mostly from the 20th century, including Emily Nichols Hatch and Anna Richards Brewster. And we have a couple of other exhibits coming up soon that we're delighted to be talking about and putting up in our gallery. So please stay tuned to our Facebook page or check the museum's website for more information. Now, let's get around to the good stuff here. Luke Swinson, as I mentioned, is one of the artists who's featured in our current exhibit, Dadibaajimo, Two Mississauga Artists Share Stories. He lives in what is today Kitchener, Ontario, and Luke's work can be seen in galleries and other spaces, which we'll talk about a little bit around Southern Ontario, as well as in several public art murals and installations in the Kitchener-Waterloo area. And I'm going to be putting a link to Luke's Instagram feed, which is the best place to check out his art. But he also has a brand new website, which we'll link to as well in this in the Facebook post as we move forward here. So without further ado, welcome Luke Swinson to this artist's conversation, which we were finally able to get working after a frustrating amount of technical difficulties.
Thanks, Quentin.
Yeah. So I wanted to start out by asking you to talk a little bit about your background and where you come from, and yeah, and also about the First Nation for which you are a member. So where'd you grow up, man?
So I was born in Lindsay, Ontario, pretty close to my Indigenous community at Mississaugas of Skucag Island First Nation, right by Port Perry on Lake Skucag, and moved around a lot. Ended up in Kitchener, and I've been in Kitchener for 23 years now.
Wow, okay.
So yeah, this is very much home for me.
Kitchener, Kitchener Waterloo, which proper residents are allowed to call KW, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So Kitchener-Waterloo, for folks who don't know, is sort of like northwest of Toronto, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's right.
And what took your family to Kitchener, if you don't mind my asking?
Work.
Okay.
My dad is a graphic designer, and that's where the work was at the time. So
Okay.
Yeah, that's why we're here. I feel like my entire family's still here. I feel like I could speak for my family when I say that we love it here. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So, and you're a band member of the Mississaugas of Skucag Island,
Yes.
and Skucag Island is on the eastern. It's over in the eastern part of on the other eastern side of Toronto, right? It's over in. Well, yeah. Can you tell us where Skucag Island is?
No. Yeah, north. I guess it would be northeast, a little bit northeast of Toronto. Probably about 40 minutes, half an hour around there.
Okay.
I think I've only been there from Toronto once. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you feel comfortable talking about sort of the history of the Mississaugas of Skucag Island? Like, are they they're Treaty 7, right? Isn't that they're part of the Treaty 7?
Yeah, Williams Treaty.
Williams Treaty.
Yeah. The history is beyond me. The deep history of Skucag Island, definitely. I couldn't blab about that for very long.
Okay, that's fine. So you have described yourself to me as a self-taught artist, and I guess one of the interesting things about that is always like somebody gets inspired from art somewhere, whether they're self-taught or whether they go to get some formal training. So I was wondering if you could talk about like your early experiences of encountering art and encountering sort of like where pieces of art that inspired you when you were younger, or things that made you go like, oh, I want to crack the code on that. What's that about?
Yeah. Well, I would say that when I was younger, growing up, my dad, being an artist, liked to expose us all to art. And his favorite place was the McMichael Art Gallery. Near Toronto. And it's a beautiful setting. It's a beautiful gallery. I'd say my earliest memories would be going through the McMichael Art Gallery and seeing a lot of Norval Morisseau's work,
right?
A lot of Group of Seven, Emily Carr, a lot of very Canadian painters.
Yeah. Yeah. And for folks who don't know, like the McMichael Gallery is like it is near Toronto, but it's definitely like it doesn't feel like it, right? Like it's sort of like it's a gallery that's like in a sort of rural area, and it's also designed in a way that sort of like plays on that kind of rustic appeal. And it's also the home to for Americans who can be astonishingly provincial about what they know of as the art of anywhere else. The Group of Seven. Well, do you want to talk about the Group of Seven and who they were, and also about Norval Morisseau too, who's another like.
You're going to the wrong guy for history here.
Okay, I'll do it. So the Group of Seven were a group of Canadian artists from primarily from the early 20th century who were really interested in kind of claiming a very Canadian sort of art style, and really rooted in landscape, right? That was a big part of what they were focused on.
A lot of Northern Ontario.
Yeah, and so they would often, to me, they're sort of analogous in America, like 2 generations earlier, to like the Hudson River School, like people who were sort of painting these like grandiose landscapes, and using those landscapes as kind of inspirations to make a kind of almost a nationalist acclaim.
Mm-hmm.
And then Norval Morrisseau was Cree, I believe.
Ojibwe.
Ojibwe, yeah. And also a very prominent figure in particularly Indigenous Canadian art.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the McMichael Gallery has a lot of that kind of stuff. Do you have any particular pieces by Morrisseau that you like, or that you sort of like that you think about or you remember?
I don't know the title of this piece, but as you're coming into the McMichael Art Gallery, there is one of his pieces kind of above you as you walk in the main hallway, and I have a picture of when I was a lot younger standing in front of that painting, and I just remember seeing that one every time I came in and being like, that's Indigenous art, like
Right.
I didn't, it's so complicated, especially with, growing up around a lot of Group of Seven, like, a lot of people, when they think of Canadian art, they think of Group of Seven, right? And it's like, I mean, that they're not the only the artists, right?
Well, and they also painted a landscape that was violently depopulated, right? A big part of, and that's the truth. That's the same deal with the Hudson River School, right? It's like these guys are painting landscapes that are empty of people that 50 years before they were painting had lots of people in them, right? People moving through them all the time, right? So there's a kind of like an erasure that's happening in those sorts of naturalized or even stylized landscapes, especially when they sort of become elevated to nationalist kind of status, like the Group of Seven are. And I love the Group of Seven. Like I like the Michael Gallery too, right? Like there's a lot to learn from those guys. And Morrisseau is interesting too, because we're going to take a look at some of your work here later. But when I first saw a lot of your stuff, Morrisseau, the influence of Morrisseau sort of jumped out at me. A lot of the way that you guys treat color and line and shape is to me is very similar. And this maybe gets to my next question, which is like, Morrisseau is Morrisseau, and he's an artist who is drawing on his sort of traditions and interests, but he's uniquely his own, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if you for you, as someone who's a person of Indigenous descent and a band member who's also trying to be an artist as an individual, if like I'm not sure if I have a really good question here, but I guess we'll sort of talk about this.
I think I know where you're going.
Yeah, but like you both draw on a tradition and also are trying to do your own thing with it, right?
Yeah.
And so like I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I think so. I guess I'm gonna go back about 5 years now. Is when my pursuit of art as a career kind of took off, and that was I was kind of just playing with art styles and I just remember drawing in my apartment, and I was at the time looking at a lot of Norval Morrisseau's work and other Indigenous artists, and I just had this kind of epiphany that that's my art style too. That's also part of who I am, because my indigeneity was very much rooted in another place, in Skucag Island, which I'd go to powwows, I'd go to the Christmas banquet, I'd go see my family there. But I didn't I didn't pay much attention to the culture, the language, everything that goes along with it, growing up. And so I think this was kind of a moment, and I think at the time, I don't know more was happening.
Right.
There was a lot of social movements that kind of made me realize that this is part of who I am, and it's something that I should care about, and it's part of my identity that I've kind of ignored for most of my life, and not even on purpose. It was just something that I just didn't access. I couldn't really access very easily. And representation in Kitchener-Waterloo for Indigenous people is, it's not great. That, and that might be changing. We can probably talk about that later. But at the time, I was very inspired by Indigenous artists, and I started drawing. And I had struggled. Like I've been an artist for most of my life, and I had done professional artwork before this time, but I just didn't. Nothing felt natural to me. I couldn't. It was frustrating to me. Art was just. It wasn't what I thought it should be until this moment, and I just remember I started drawing animals, and I loved it. It felt so natural to me, and it was kind of a beautiful thing. And that's where it all started, and it really feels like that was just yesterday. But here I am drawing animals still.
Yeah, man. No, absolutely. I want to talk about animals in a bit here. But you mentioned Idle No More, and I wonder for again our some of our American viewers who may not be familiar with Idle No More, what was Idle No More, and what did it sort of look like, and yeah.
Well, I think at the time, and I shouldn't even say it was just Idle No More, but as a whole, it was just kind of like Indigenous people had enough, had enough of the government. I can't even put words to it, but it was just it was like the title says, like they didn't want to stand by and let injustices happen, and it was a protest, and still ongoing, and has led to a lot of other things, but
it's like I mean, my limited understanding of it was that it was like a sort of protest movement that had involved a lot of sort of public reclamations of spaces, right?
Yeah.
Like people would go out and have drum circles and dances and things like that out in in malls and in main streets and things like that. And certainly, like the other piece that I sort of understand about it is that it was largely spurred by young people. That it wasn't kind of a old guard movement. That it was a lot of young people were involved, and it sort of galvanized a lot of young people towards activism and engagement. I think Kathy's mentioned that to me in the past as well. So okay, cool. I want to talk more about politics too, because that I think that.
Oh, I'm not very political. I'm not a historian, so
I won't put you on the spot. I promise, Luke. Okay. The work that I know you work in a number of media, but the work that's in dadibaajimo right now is primarily digital. And I wonder if you could talk about like why you sort of gravitate to digital art, and then also just like technical things, like what kinds of programs you use and how you go about sort of putting things together. So what drew you to work in digital media?
Well, it was definitely my dad's influence. Being a graphic designer, I was exposed to computers in an artistic context when I was 5, I think. I remember my dad he got a Mac in 1994, I believe it was.
Wow, yeah.
Like we've had Macs before people knew what they were. And so yeah, that always interested me, what he was doing on his computer, and that carried into high school, where I took it a bit further and started to do my own artwork. Started using drawing tablets on the computer, and yeah, that it always just kind of stuck with me. I went. It was very much a strength for me in high school, and traditional art, painting, sculpting, was not.
Yeah.
It was not a strength, to the point where when I went to art school, I went to Sheridan for a year after high school, and I remember telling my high school art teacher that I was going for just general art, and he laughed. He was like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
He was, he would have expected me to go for graphic design, or industrial design, or something computer related, and he was right. I didn't do well. I lasted a year, and yeah. But yeah, back to your question. I've always just liked computers,
Yeah.
even just in a non-artistic context. I've just always liked computers. And so more recently, I've been using an iPad to do most of my artwork.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Which is, that's for digital artists, that's kind of the thing. They're incredible little machines, and specifically I use Procreate, which is an app on the iPad, and I use kind of a mix of different programs. Like I'll also use Photoshop and Illustrator on my computer, and Lightroom to edit, and just kind of a mix. But yeah, the it's definitely my preferred method, because of the freedom and the time. I can just so easily put an idea down, and it's so easy for me to translate, my ideas, and yeah, it's just easy. That's it. Like, people.
No, yeah.
People are always like, "Oh yeah, you can just like erase things or undo things." I'm like, yeah, that's exactly why I use it. It's just easier. Like it's not messy, there's it's great. I can definitely see the appeal of just like, pencil to paper and paintbrush to canvas kind of art, definitely. And that's something that I've been more interested in learning lately. But I firmly believe that I'm a digital artist, and I will always be.
Yeah.
First and foremost. Mm-hmm.
And so for you, like your workflow is like, you like iPad, Procreate on iPad to output it to something, some kind of post production software on a computer, and then
I usually start with pencil on paper and just do a quick sketch. Yeah, I mean it'll always be the easiest, because I can do it anywhere, and just to get the idea down, and then I'll do most of the work on the iPad in Procreate, and then from there I usually put it into Adobe Lightroom, which is editing software, and at that point I can adjust any colors. I can adjust the contrast, or I basically have created my own filters that are very much me, like my color palette, the way I like my art to look like, and I can apply those. So my illustrations, I mean, at least to me, look very raw before they go into there, and then they look finished after I'm done editing. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. And then that begs another question, because like obviously one of the advantages of pencil to paper or paintbrush to canvas is like when you're done, you have a physical thing that you can hand to somebody, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, for you, like, given that, like, you can't, like, you want to be you're a professional artist, and you want to, like, so how do you then output things from there? Like, where does things go to digital platforms or tangible media or what?
It's I kind of thought of it as a kind of a backwards process, because I've noticed lately that, okay, so my process would be, to take it from my iPad or, my computer, wherever it is, and I'll post it to my website, social media, and then if I want to profit off of it, I'll sell prints, sell art prints. But I have noticed that lately it feels like I'm working backwards, because I have all of these digital illustrations that I've made, and I've never physically made them. They're all, digital, they're all on the computer, but I've been getting a lot of traditional art jobs. And a lot of them are kind of like, you can do what you want. You can use existing illustrations. And so I've been doing mural work, I've been doing canvas work, and just using my designs that are already complete, the digital design.
Okay.
And so it feels funny, because usually, a lot of artists will paint, they'll do their painting, their finished piece will be on canvas, and then they'll scan it and sell prints of it.
Right.
But I do the digital piece and then create, paintings from that, if I so choose. But yeah, it feels, my process is changing constantly. I haven't perfected it at all. It's kind of all over the place, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, there's tensions there between, like, the creative process and also, like, I want to be able to fund myself doing this, and so I need to have a thing I can give somebody. And, like, those one's process will then change when you're, like, caught up in those sorts of social interactions, right? And so you mentioned public art, murals and stuff like that. I wonder if you could talk about some recent mural work that you've done, and if we could maybe pivot to some of that. Okay. So, like,
So I'd say the first of my own mural work is a part of an ongoing relationship I have with the city of Waterloo. I paint a temporary mural on concrete in, like, the public square in uptown Waterloo, right in the middle of the city. And it is on and for Indigenous Peoples Day, which is June 21st in Canada. And I've been doing that 3 years now. It's a cool job because I get a lot of freedom to express myself. They trust me, and it gives me a chance to kind of explore my style and explore ideas, and also to get Indigenous art into the public. And recently, I actually just made a post on Instagram the other day that where I talked about how growing up, and I mentioned this before, there wasn't much Indigenous representation where I lived. It very much felt like, there wasn't other Indigenous people here. And I find, especially with KW, and I think that a lot of other cities can relate, but a lot of the Indigenous groups are based around post-secondary. The universities here have great Indigenous programs. They have thriving communities, and they have for a long time, but I didn't go to school here. I went to high school, and then, Well, actually, sorry, I did. I went to Conestoga College for a few years, but I didn't engage with the Indigenous group there. And, you know, I completely regret that. But yeah, I have noticed now that I am starting to engage here with other Indigenous people and getting to know the communities is very centered around the universities.
Right.
And that's great, you know, if you go if you go to them. But it wasn't great growing up. And I touched on how amazing it would have been for me to see Indigenous art in public,
Right.
like the importance of that. And I never ever imagined that it would be my art that was in public. And I think that's cool. I love doing public art. It's very rewarding. And I'm happy because I'm not the only Indigenous artist doing public work in KW. And I think that's important because there are a lot of Indigenous voices and viewpoints. And, you know, I want, it's not enough to just have one Indigenous voice, especially from somebody who didn't have the same experience that a lot of Indigenous people did growing up on res, you know. So yeah, I am lucky to have some of these experiences. I recently did a mural on the street. Actually, so I have an art studio with my partner, Alana, and the street right in front of it, they've just turned into a pedestrian only street. And I got the opportunity to paint on the street. So I did a series of circular animal illustrations. And that, I would say that was that's, you know, my biggest permanent public art piece. And it was a blast. I loved it.
So that's really interesting, and it makes me think about how, actually circling back to what we were talking about with landscape painting, right? Like a big part of the reason why there wasn't visible Indigenous artists, because it was expropriated, right? Like it was like people were removed and prevented from you know, through residential schools and through displacement and all kinds of things, from being artists in public or being artists at all that recognize their own indigeneity. So that's really interesting. How did you get involved with, like, I mean, you don't need to go into like the political machinations necessarily, but like why did the government of Kitchener-Waterloo, or the city of Waterloo, want to have public Indigenous art? Like, do you know how that process got started?
Yeah. I think, well, a lot of different ways. Definitely, I think, recently, there has been a land back movement in Kitchener. In Victoria Park, there is a camp there. And there's an Indigenous group that have taken that part of the park, and they're basically demanding that the city provide space for Indigenous people, which is a long time coming.
Right.
And I think it kind of got to the point where this group was just like, you know, we've had enough of trying to play by their rules. And so, yeah, they've been there for over 100 days now, I believe.
Wow.
And they have they've really engaged with the city. And also, aside from that, separately from that, I think as well, a lot of the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of the social unrest and just terrible stuff that's going on in the States and and Canada.
Yeah.
I think that sparked specifically Kitchener-Waterloo into motion a bit. I think they realized that they had an obligation to the BIPOC community, and they hired my partner. She works for the city now, and she's doing some really amazing engagement with Indigenous people. And she's Indigenous as well. She's from Oneida.
Okay.
And I feel like all these different things are kind of coming together, and it's kind of helping to form this like one Indigenous community,
Yeah.
and this one movement here, and the city sees that, and they at least know the value in that, and I think it was just today that Kitchener, it was a big deal that Kitchener, maybe today or yesterday, they made a promise to hire basically an anti-racism team.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, like a BIPOC team to just do all the work that needs to be done.
Right.
That the city hasn't been doing, and most cities haven't. So yeah, there's a lot of exciting stuff happening here, and I wish I knew all the details. That is very much just like my limited understanding of what's happening. But I think when it comes to art, also the pandemic has really affected. Like I live downtown Kitchener, and so a lot of my art experiences have been very just downtown.
Yeah.
All of my connections, all the work I've done is downtown. And I think also the city, downtown Kitchener especially sees the value in public art. And it's also something it's safe for them to invest in, because it encourages people to be outside,
Right.
and not necessarily gather in groups. And yeah, I think that there's just all these different things happening, and it's just right now it's ironically just such an amazing time for artists, and especially Black, Indigenous, artists of color. Like it's kind of amazing to see all these opportunities for everybody during such a awful time. Really.
No, for real.
Mm-hmm.
For real. And too, like, I mean, especially I think about like public art, like so much of the ways in which issues of race and ethnicity and indigeneity play out are around vectors of like what's private and hidden and what's public and
Mm-hmm.
promoted, right? And so like the part, I mean, a big part of the land back movement, as far as I understand it, is the reclamation of public space, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things that I think that the Six Nations group is calling for is like the turning over of public lands in Ontario
Mm-hmm.
to Indigenous stewardship, basically, right? Like that's what, and like unused land that is public land. So it's like this vectors of public and private are really sort of like lining up along the sort of colonial thing, right? I wonder about so you said that you have been painting murals on Indigenous Peoples Day. You do it all in one day?
Yeah.
And maybe you talk about what that experience is like, about like not just having a piece of public art, but actually making the art in public and as an Indigenous person too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I've had pretty good experience doing it so far. It is a very public spot that I do it. This last year was a lot more chill because there wasn't as many people out at the time, and I had a big massive fence around me while I was painting.
Oh, yeah.
And I had my partner help me. She's also a muralist, and we got it done so quickly that we didn't really engage much with anyone. But the previous years, it's cool. It's most people were just curious. Anyone walking by, they would usually identify that it's Indigenous art. And yeah, surprisingly haven't had any bad experiences with that, other than people walking right through it while I was painting. But that happens. But yeah, it's doing public art. I never, this seems like such an obvious thing, but I never thought of the kind of performance aspect of it, and the social aspect of it, and that is so relevant. That the piece that I did on the street this summer, I definitely had some bad experiences with that one. If you don't think that there's racism, go and paint Indigenous inspired art on the road.
Oh wow!
And people come from the woodworks, but overall great experience. People are always just very curious, and it's nice to be able to talk to people.
Okay, cool. Well, in the couple minutes we got left, I wanted to show a couple of pieces of yours from the exhibit, and then we could maybe talk about them a little bit. And then so let me share my screen here. There we go. All right. Okay, so my hope is that people are currently seeing your piece entitled Aki. Okay, so this is a piece called Aki. I wonder if you could talk about, just tell us about what this is, and kind of talk about it a little bit.
So this piece, Aki means earth in Anishnaabe, and it's supposed to represent like the turtle is representing Turtle Island, North America. And the figures within, I was going for, I wanted to touch on our relationship with animals, our human relationship with animals, and how we are kind of all in the same place together, and we share the same space together. On Turtle Island. It's pretty simple imagery, but I think that it's powerful. I think that most of my art is based on this kind of like relationship and obligation that we have with the natural world around us. And I think this is one of the one of my few, I'd say, more abstract pieces that has a little bit more meaning than just what it looks like.
Sure. Yeah, no, I and that's part of why I picked this, because I like as we will see here, like you work in a continuum from abstraction and representation, right? And this is I think this is definitely one of your more abstract pieces. And but also maintain some of the same elements of your work, the interest in animals, the interest in roots, which I want to talk about a little bit too in a minute here. And yeah, you said Aki means earth in Anishnaabe, in the Anishnaabe language. Okay. Okay, let's go to the next piece. So this is called Strong Currents. And if you could tell us a little bit about who this person is and where this piece came from.
Okay. I don't think you're quite. Oh, I'm still looking at the turtle right now, but maybe it's changed over on.
Hold on a sec.
There we go. Yeah. Okay. So this is my sister. This is my sister Elsa, and Strong Currents is actually she's a musician. That's one of her songs. And yeah, my sister and I have both been on this journey of discovery and reclaiming our Indigenous culture kind of at the same time. And I think this, at the time, in my head, I was probably just like, I really just want to, draw a really cool picture of my sister.
Yeah.
But it's kind of over time, since this was a few years ago now. It's gained a lot more meaning to me, because I think it was very much in the back of my mind. It was very much intentional that that this piece has strong ties to that, to our to reclaiming our culture together. Yeah.
I wonder, like, well, okay, I have a question about this piece. We'll come
Sure.
back to it. Okay, let's go to the next one here. So this is called I think I'm pronouncing this right, Bongishimo.
Yes, I believe you are. I remember I had to check with Kathy when I was there about some of the pronunciation.
Oh yeah.
And this is actually a good piece for me to talk about. Most of my artwork is a lot of it's funny. I have a lot of people asking, what does this mean? There's a lot of assumption that there is deep meaning in everything that I do, every piece that I do. And this is a good example of, this is a duck.
Yeah.
This is a duck on the water. I started out drawing. I thought I really like ducks. I think they're beautiful. I really like lakes. I want to draw a duck on a lake. And then after, and this was, earlier on, when I was also trying to learn some Anishnaabe Moan. And so I would look up, different words, different phrases, and it was kind of just the beginnings of me learning, unfortunately by myself, which is not the most ideal way to learn a language.
Right.
And so there's there a lot of my pieces are named. It's just the literal translation of what it is. I think Bongishimo means sunrises, I believe. So I think, especially since my art career kind of started on Instagram, actually, or just on social media in general, this was my way of just kind of sharing my exploration of my culture and language, and just kind of engaging that way, and it's cool because it's kind of evolved, and I'm still learning, and I'm still very at this very elementary level with the language, and with a lot of the culture, but it's cool now to start hearing from people, or even people just say they go to buy something from me, or they go to talk about a piece, and they use the Ojibwe translation of the animal, instead of just being like, oh, this the wolf. They'll be like, oh, mangan, and it's cool because that is such an important language it should be an important language for everybody around here.
Right.
Especially. And I think it's important because another epiphany I had a while ago was that if I heard people speaking Anishnaabe Moan on the bus, I wouldn't recognize it at the time, which is sad. It's terribly sad.
No, right, yeah.
And so, when I had that was part of my kind of cultural awakening, and I was just like, this is, my grandma speaks the language. She never speaks it. She doesn't speak it much anymore, and I want to speak it to her, and I want to talk to her, and I think that it's important that we all feel that way. because it's, it's beautiful, a beautiful language, and there's so many beautiful Indigenous languages that are so important. So the language and the education aspect is very much intertwined with my artwork in a pretty simple way, but I think profound for me, at least.
Well, yeah, and and also like, to me, it doesn't seem simple with a lowercase s at all. Like it's like very, no, it's like it's very rich, because you're reflecting on the relational nature between people, and also the relational nature between people and their environment, their ecology, and all of those are bound up in the question of like language, and what language is spoken, what languages do you hear, what languages do you not hear. And that actually brings me to an interesting thing here, which is all three of these pieces, and we could certainly look at more, but all three of these pieces have what at least appear to me to be roots as a very prominent motif. And I wonder if you could talk about like sort of roots, the idea of roots as a metaphor, the idea of like organic roots, like the ways in which you think about sort of roots as a visual sort of language.
I feel like roots are obviously a pretty common metaphor, and I think pretty relevant to me, in that that's roots, like where I'm rooted, and in various ways is so important to who I am, and sometimes good ways, sometimes bad ways, but very much the kind of natural aspect of roots is so relevant right now, for everybody. Just discovering who they are, and I mean, how important the earth is to us, just in the very literal sense of roots. I just think there's so many meaning. There's so much meaning to roots, and I mean, one thing is I've always just loved what they look like. Like, people can talk all the time about the meaning behind something, but sometimes I just think the shape forms are beautiful. But yeah, I think that it all comes down to kind of my connection and my roots to my Indigenous culture, which is reflected in almost all of my pieces.
No, that's great, and it's I'm a person who's constantly trying to get people to explain things to me and like verbalize their things. So like, I apologize for trying to make you meet me where I'm at, Luke. So I've two more questions, and then we'll maybe call it an evening here. The first is like, we're not going to flip through all of these, but you with the exception of your more abstract pieces, all of your pieces have a landscape kind of element to them. We talked about landscapes earlier, obviously, and I wonder if, like, for you, do you have real landscapes that are inspired by, that you draw from? You have conceptual landscapes in your head that you just kind of like manifest out? Is it a mix of the two? Like, where do you get your sort of like spatial design?
Yeah, I would say it's most of the landscape that I draw is just from my general experience of being in nature. It's not, they're usually not based on actual places, like this, this picture of the duck. That's not, that is a real place, and that I've probably seen that image many times, but I didn't reference a photo for that. I have before, definitely. I think there are a couple pieces that are actual places, but most of the time it's just kind of whatever comes out of my head. But yeah, it's very, I get very just generally inspired when I go, further north, and just anywhere around here, really. Or even when I went to Oneonta. Just driving through the mountains, and it's just, it's my favorite thing to be out in those natural settings, and I just soak it up, and it just kind of explodes out of my brain onto the canvas usually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And then the last thing I wanted to, this kind of circles back to talking about your dad and graphic design. Like there's definitely like certainly when I look at your art, I see a real kind of strong design, sort of like design element to your sort of aesthetic, right? There's clean lines, clear shapes. And the other piece to that I wanted to ask about, and something we've talked about, is I know that you certainly enjoy and maybe are inspired by, to a certain extent, comic book art. And so I wonder if you could talk about like, and those two things come from the same place. A lot of the early comic artists were actually graphic designers, right? Like they did comics to pay some bills. So I wonder if you talk about like sort of popular art, graphic design art, and how you, how sort of those got folded into your sort of personal aesthetic.
Yeah. I mean, you pretty much nailed it right there.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, that's it. Yep. But I like, back to your question of my earliest experiences with art. One of those things was comic book art. My dad loved comic books, specifically Jack Kirby comic books. Jack Kirby was, his style was very colorful and very bold and, very graphic. And, kind of like a minimalist aspect to it as well. And, in the way that a lot of artists, maybe not at the time, but more now, are going for realism. And like shiny, big, bulgy muscles, and all this really detailed textures and stuff. And his were just, he just had such an interesting style, design style, and I've always been inspired by that. I definitely had a lot of memories of sitting on the floor of used bookstores, looking through piles of comic books, trying to find the Kirbys, and I wasn't even much of a comic book reader. I was more just, it was the pictures for me, and it was a big, my dad is a massive influence on who I am artistically.
Right.
All of his interests were my interests and still are my interests. Like, we're very similar artistically. But yeah, I would say it's kind of hard for me to peg exactly where my style comes from, but I'd say it is very much a mixture of, other Indigenous artists, comic book art, maybe a group of seven a bit, just Ontario landscape. Even things like flipping through architectural magazines when I was younger. And my mom, also artistic, she was very much into interior design and interior decorating, and so all these kind of artistic influences come together, and I can see bits and pieces of everything in my own art. Even if I'm, I think most artists have terrible moments of insecurity about their own style, and they haven't found their style yet, and I've been through that so many times, and I don't think that'll ever change. But I talk to people that know me, and they're always like, you have a style. Like, you definitely, this is very much you.
Yeah, you do.
And you can see it, and that's always reassuring, and it's usually the case for most artists, definitely.
Yeah. Well, certainly I'm continue to be impressed with your style and your process moving, like your creative endeavors moving forward. And I think that's actually a good place to end it. Where can people find your art that's in the digital world?
I think Instagram is the best place. Instagram is the best place. Luke Swinson Art. I do have a website under the same name. It's pretty basic right now, but it's there. It will link to my Instagram as well. And Facebook under the same name. And yeah.
Okay. Well, Luke, thank you so much for talking to me and for sharing your story and your outlook to everybody here on Facebook. And again, I breaks my heart more people can't see the exhibit right now, but for folks who are part of the Hartwick community, the Yager Museum is open to Hartwick faculty, staff, and students Thursday through Saturday, 12 to 4:30, and you can, or 12 to 4, excuse me, and you can see Luke's art along with Kathy Jameson's art in the exhibit Dadibaajimo to Mississauga Artists Share Stories in the Elton Gallery. Luke, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Take care.